Substance dualism is the philosophical view that our universe is composed of two kinds of substance, physical substance and the non-physical substance of souls, minds or consciousness. It contrasts with monist theories and their requirement of only one fundamental reality. Substance dualism is one of a number of different dualist philosophies, but they won't be the focus of this video, so for convenience I'll be referring to substance dualism simply as dualism. Before we even consider the flaws in its reasoning and supporting arguments, we can already see that dualism is unworkable. Substance, in the sense intended here, is a physical concept. The term non-physical substance is literally meaningless. When asked to explain it, dualists commonly fall back on physical analogies, referring to energy, or likening it to sound waves manifesting through a television set. But energy and sound waves are physical. Saying a non-physical substance is like something physical, except it's not physical, explains nothing. This term is simply self-contradicting, which is not a trivial problem. With a non-viable concept underpinning its entire philosophy, dualism is incapable of shedding light on consciousness in any useful or meaningful way. Further basic problems arise from the tendency of many dualists to use terms like soul, mind and consciousness interchangeably when trying to justify their position. They have crucial differences. Operations of mind aren't always conscious. For example, when we try to recall a piece of information, it may appear quite suddenly in our consciousness without us ever being aware of the processes of mind that retrieved it. When it comes to souls, no one's shown such things even exist. The concept of spirit essences that survive physical death needs its own separate evidence long before we throw it into the mix with minds and consciousness. These terms are not interchangeable, and statements about one don't automatically apply to another. The focus here is on consciousness, which concerns the contents of our awareness or experience. Why do some claim there are two kinds of substance? Many point to the private nature of our access to consciousness. They point out that while you and I have public access to physical objects, you don't have access to my conscious experience, which is private to me, so consciousness must be a non-physical substance. But why should anyone have access if they're not the one using my brain? Given the speed and complexity of brain activity and the organic variation between different brains, it's hardly surprising that the richly detailed contents of experience can't currently be revealed by external examination. And if they can't be revealed, it stands to reason that each brain user would have private access to their own consciousness. Some dualists make much of the fact that if we examine brains, we don't see thoughts, just physical matter. But thoughts don't have to exhibit the same properties as the things they represent. If they did, they wouldn't be representations, they'd be duplications. There's no reason why we should see thoughts. We already know of systems far less complex than the brain, which store and process information in encoded physical formats that don't reveal content. If we film the sea, then open up our camera, we don't expect water to come pouring out, but that doesn't mean the camera has a non-physical entity lurking inside it. Thoughts may not have weight, colour or texture like physical objects, but nor do processes like migration or metamorphosis. If thoughts and consciousness are representational processes, we wouldn't expect to describe them in the same way we describe objects. It doesn't follow that things we don't describe like physical objects must be non-physical objects. If we're not careful with language, major misunderstandings can occur. Simply using labels like physical or mental can lull us into the false view that we must be dealing with some grand division of entities, rather than something more subtle like a shift of perspective. But let's consider the following situation. Someone says they want to move their arm, then their arm moves. From an external viewpoint, physical analysis reveals that brain activity associated with decision-making is causally sufficient to account for the chain of neurological and muscular activity that leads to the movement. An actor, from an internal viewpoint, can report experiencing a decision to move as well as the internal sensations of movement, though how the movement is happening never enters consciousness. The moving arm itself is obviously observable from both viewpoints. This gives us two complementary accounts of the same event. There's what the brain and body are doing and how they're doing it from a third-person perspective, and what the experience of using and being a brain with a body is like from a first-person perspective. The dualist analysis of this situation typically confuses the two perspectives by attributing an experience with the power to cause movement. Not only does this create another needless paradox for the dualist, that is, the notion of physical and non-physical substances interacting, there's evidence, as I'll be exploring in another video, that our awareness of making decisions occurs after the decisions have been made non-consciously by the brain. Some feel they can gather support for dualism by simply declaring that if we split a brain in two and put each half in different bodies, we don't get two personalities. Not only are there no grounds for declaring this, given that such an experiment is beyond current technology, even if such an experiment were possible, the best evidence favours the opposite conclusion. So-called split-brain patients, whose right and left hemispheres can't communicate due to the connecting corpus callosum being severed, have been shown to exhibit independent awareness, preference and beliefs within each hemisphere. Since each half of a split brain can display autonomous functioning, if it were possible to transplant each half into different bodies, the evidence suggests two personalities are exactly what we'd get. Indeed, it's not clear what the alternative was ever supposed to be. It may be hard to imagine having the potential for two consciousnesses, but the clinical evidence already exists. Split brain research isn't problematic for monists, but it is for dualists who assume the indivisibility of consciousness, an assumption that often leaks out in questions like, but which hemisphere would be the original person? Which incidentally is no more challenging to monism than cutting a bar of chocolate in half and asking which one is the original bar. Something dualists often point out is that most of our body cells are replaced every 7 years, so that in physical terms we're literally not the same people we were 7 years ago. They conclude from this that whatever maintains personal identity can't be physical, so must be a non-physical substance. In other words, a constantly changing body can't account for the continuity of identity. This is false. Constant change doesn't even disrupt the continuity of the very thing that's undergoing all the changes, the body itself. Look at your arm. Has 7 years made any significant difference to its appearance or function? We know fingerprints can remain identifiable for 70 years or more. Both the structure and functioning of a system can be maintained in extraordinary detail despite the change of component parts. Besides, it's change that allows us to carry on functioning. Without it, we cease to live. Cell replacement disrupts neither brain structure nor function, and there's no basis for claiming it prohibits the continuity of personal identity. Furthermore, dualists who want to use the cell replacement argument as evidence of an independent consciousness unaffected by physical change have to explain why major brain damage is always accompanied by dramatic changes to psychological identity and functioning. Degenerative diseases like advanced Alzheimer's can be so devastating to the identity that sufferers are often described by those who've known them as physical shells. If consciousness is non-physical and irreducible, the specific psychological impairments that result from damage to specific brain structures become problematic. The intimate correlation between injury and impairment is especially inconvenient for those who claim that consciousness can survive bodily death. What exactly is it that's supposed to be surviving after our brains and physical senses are no more? Let's be clear, if the sense organs for sound and vision are destroyed in an otherwise healthy body, there's no immaterial backup system that kicks in and allows us to see or hear again. If we take the senses away one by one, we quickly find ourselves in a situation where we can't perceive anything about our surroundings or even our own bodies. And if the brain goes too, how exactly are we meant to acquire or process any kind of experience? If we need a brain for consciousness, then consciousness can't survive the brain's destruction. But if we don't need a brain for consciousness, then there's no reason in principle why any object couldn't be regarded as conscious, nor any inherent reason for us to have bodies in the first place. Many find substance dualism appealing, because until its flaws are understood, it appears to offer a line of reasoning that allows life after bodily death. However, with the contradictory concept of non-physical substance at its foundation, it's a philosophy that begins in incoherence, and this incoherence inevitably permeates and pollutes its reasoning. Self-contradictory concepts are not profound, they're just poorly formed. And labelling consciousness a non-physical substance has no valid justification, nor does it increase our understanding. It leads only to mystification. This provides a convenient retreat for substance dualists who like to play the metaphysics card when confronted with awkward questions. Noticeably, they rarely hesitate to offer scientifically testable arguments when they think they've got one, though as we've seen, these tend not only to be unsuccessful but flat out contradicted by the evidence. But ultimately, while competing theories make progress with evidence-based insights into consciousness, which will be the subject of another video, substance dualists fail to see that it's the whole premise of their philosophy that leaves them plagued by paradoxes. As a philosophy that assigns bogus causes to meaningless concepts, substance dualism is doomed in more ways than one to remain lacking in crucial substance.